my hometown, and I helped plan it. And we got an auditorium for 250 people. We ended up with more than 14,000 people. It shut down the whole center. The first speaker said, "You're not here." And everyone's, "We're not here." And he said, "Well, I've watched NBC, CBS, and ABC, and you're not here. This is not happening." And so on. So I guess I'm not here either, Paul. I guess you're not a Marine. And you didn't help us, right? Back in 2004. And Steve Gardner back there. Where's Steve? Steve Gardner isn't here either. Steve Gardner was the fellow who served the longest on John Kerry's boat. About 2.5 out of Kerry's 3 months, roughly, in Vietnam. He was fired when he came forward in 2004 from his job by people, well-known Democrats, because he was willing to come forward and help us out. I think maybe the very place to start is tell you a little bit about our story, because it so involved Paul. I was from a Navy family. I was a Naval Academy guy. My father and my grandfather were too. I had an uncle killed at Pearl Harbor, another one killed in Korea. I lost one of my cousins on the Scorpion when the Scorpion went down off the coast of Africa. And I went to Vietnam, volunteered on these swift boats. And when I got there, these were little tiny boats, maybe 50 feet long. We had a crew of 5 or 6. A guy named Kerry had left just shortly before I got there, and I actually took over his boat. He was disliked intensely. He was a joke to everybody. They called him Quick John because he was there for such a short period of time. The normal tour was a year. He was actually there about 4 months. And everybody was happy to see him go, and that would have been the end of it all. The people serving there, most of them were guys that were 19 to 21 years old. They were kids. They were making about $110 a month. They didn't serve for glory. They didn't serve for money. And the reason they served was for you all. I mean, it sounds silly, but they served because they believed in our country. They believed in the idea of freedom. And when you saw them die, they really died with your names on their lips. That's really who they were talking about. And they sacrificed a lot to do that. When I got back to the United States, and I heard the speech of Kerry before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he talked about crimes being committed on a day-to-day basis and essentially labeled us as murderers. It was just an injustice that I couldn't tolerate. I kept challenging Kerry to debate. Ultimately, I debated Kerry on the Dick Cavett show, and truthfully did very badly. The audience, which was stacked in front of him, booed him, and he just crawled under a rock and sort of disappeared. Got back into politics a decade later. I moved on with my life. I had no substantial political involvement. I've never run for office, never will. I've never managed any campaign. I never want to. Never held any governmental office of any kind. In 2004, I had just given a kidney to my wife Ann, who much later died, and I was in the hospital in Houston, and I looked at the television, and there was Kerry on television, and he had a brown leather jacket, which I remember because nobody ever wore a brown leather jacket in Vietnam. The temperature was 100 degrees. It was just crazy. But it was his political theater. And the television said that he was the presumptive Democratic nominee, that he had carried the primary in Iowa. And I thought I was hallucinating. I was very, very sick, and I really thought that I just sort of was really sick and was imagining things from my youth, but sure enough, it was the truth. The guy who was the commanding officer of our unit, Admiral Hoffman, who Steve knows very well too, sent out an email to all of us saying, "General Quarters, there's a terrible problem, we've all got to get together." And we all got together. Steve Gardner, I don't think, had ever voted for a Republican. There were many people who basically had little role in politics, anybody. And we just decided we had to do something. We had a lot less people than are here, and a lot less money even that are here, but we decided we really needed to do something. We decided we would have a press conference in Washington, and we had a press conference there, and the sum result of which was that we were totally ignored by the media. Not zero coverage completely. We decided we would reorganize, we decided we would write a book, and we decided we'd try and get our message out. The guy that got our message out was Schiffer. Without Paul, our message never would have gotten out. He put on the prisoners of war, some of whom had spent as long as 9 and 10 years in these prison camps, who were confronted with Kerry's statements directly as prisoners to try and break them, whose wives and children were confronted by the members of the organizations Kerry was associated with in order to try and get them to shift to the anti-war cause. Paul put them on the air. He put Steve Gardner on the air back there. We don't have him here. Dick Pease was a guy terribly wounded in Vietnam. He's from Findlay, Ohio. He was here this morning and was sitting with us this morning, but his daughter just had a grandchild. And so this all is very important, but not as important as his daughter having a grandchild. So that's where he is. Paul helped us. They threatened Paul with a suit. They said, if you put this on the air, we're going to sue you under the McCain-Fine bill. They said, we're going to suspend your radio show. They said, we're going to sue you for libel. They did the same thing with our publisher. Paul nonetheless went ahead and put us on the air. And I will say one thing for the Kerry people: they're long on threats, but they're always a little cowardly when it comes to action. And the suits never materialized, even though I often challenged Kerry to sue me for libel. It would have been something that truly worth a joy, but it never showed up. And I may say, to this day, I believe that John Edwards was much the better part of that ticket, of the Kerry Edwards ticket. Paul understood what we're talking about because he had been a Marine. And so what we said, sometimes it was hard for people to understand, but Paul understood instantly because he'd been in the Marine Corps for a long time. What we said made sense. All right. That's part of the reason we're here. We're here because he showed up for us at great cost to himself. I don't think that Steve has shown up for any other congressional candidate. I know Dick Pease hasn't. The reason we came is because he really is a wonderful person that much deserves your support. Paul told us that his funded opponent, Mr. Renacci, has a New York campaign manager, he has a paid political director, he has a paid appointments director. Well, I guess that's who we are. Paul has his friends. He has you all and he has us. Now that may sound pretty silly, but I think people learn from Scott Brown in Massachusetts that friends with the message go an awful long way. They learned exactly the same thing from Butler in the NCAA tournament. And if you celebrate the Tea Parties, they learned that a long time ago when a bunch of farmers stood up against the biggest empire in the world and defeated it to establish this country. And they learned from somebody else. If money and might and power wins, President Kerry would be talking to you right now. We proved, I think, in 2004 that the truth, if you accompany it, just the truth, if you accompany it with a good heart, with good people, with good work, and with a ground game, can win. It can win against great odds. It can win against huge money. It can win against big media. And so the truth by itself, based on principle, is a powerful weapon. Ask John Kerry about that.